In 2012, a teenage girl started hearing strange noises coming from the ceiling vent above her bed. At first, it sounded like normal house noises, probably just the house settling. But then, she heard someone whisper her name. She ran out of the room and told her mom, but her mom brushed it off. "Old houses make weird sounds," she said. "Don't scare yourself." But the sounds didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, things kept going missing. Snacks, milk, even a full pack of sandwich meat. Lights she was sure she'd turned off were suddenly on, and late at night she could swear someone was breathing above her. Then one night she was lying in bed. She looked up and saw something move behind the vent. She didn't wait. She called the police. When they arrived, they searched the attic. At first, it looked empty, but tucked behind the insulation, they found a sleeping bag, half-eaten food, and a 20-year-old man. He wasn't a stranger. He was her ex-boyfriend, someone her parents had forbidden her from seeing months earlier. He had broken into the house, climbed into the attic, and lived above her room for days. He carved peepholes into the vents to watch her, and scratched messages into the wood. One of them read, "I see you."
When I tell you that this is the most disturbing missing persons case, I 100% mean it. Because you don't just go missing after jet skiing with a creepy man that you just met on vacation. 14-year-old Max DeVries went missing while on vacation with his family in Aruba back in 2004. The circumstances surrounding his disappearance are bizarre. And I've talked about his disappearance once before, but it's insane that more people don't know about it. Nothing has disturbed me more than learning about what happened to him, and the fact that the people responsible have probably gone on to hurt so many other victims. So let's talk about it. Part of the reason why this story is so horrifying is because in 2002, just 2 years before Max would vanish, his dad would suddenly die after having a heart attack. This would leave Max's mom to raise her 2 children alone, which is already devastating enough. But fast forward to May of 2004. The DeVries family, which now consisted of Yvonne, her son, 14-year-old Max, and his younger sister Dominique, were trying to put their lives back together and get used to the new normal without their dad. So to take their mind off things, they decided to plan a fun family vacation to Aruba, and tagging along was Max's aunt. Yvonne said their aunt came with them to have extra eyes on the kids and just for extra support since Yvonne was still reeling from the loss of her husband. They all stayed at the La Cabana Resort, and they were all so excited to hang out on the beach and play in the water. Growing up, they had a sailboat, so Max specifically loved the water and knew how to swim very well. A few days into their arrival, Max was playing pool at the resort when, seemingly out of nowhere, a man in his 30s approached him. To avoid being sued, I'm not going to give his full name, but his first name is David. So David starts playing pool with Max, and at first it seems a little weird to Yvonne how friendly he was being with him, but then again it was a resort where everyone was really nice to each other, so this wasn't really any cause for concern. The man then started telling Max and his family about how he was also on vacation with his adoptive father, and they were celebrating the day he was adopted so many years ago as a kid. The adoptive father is also named David, so from here on out, I'll refer to them as David Jr. and David Sr. So anyway, David Sr. then joins everyone, asking about what all they had planned for the next day. Yvonne tells him that she and her family are going parasailing, and David Sr. asks if they can join them because that sounded really fun, so Yvonne, being nice, says yes. The next day came and went, and everyone had a good time together. They all went parasailing, and then David Jr. takes Max out on a couple of rented jet skis. They came back, and Max said he had fun, and that was that. They weren't really planning on hanging out with the 2 men again, but then the next day, as the family was hanging out by the pool, David Sr. approached them. He then asked Max in front of Yvonne if he wants to go out jet skiing again. Yvonne tells him no because he just did it the day prior, but he insists, saying that he really wants Max to go and that he'd even pay for it. And Max, being a kid, was really excited and begged his mom to let him go. So eventually, Yvonne said yes, even though she really didn't want him to. The last time Max was ever seen alive was getting on a jet ski and following David Sr. out onto the water, and what happened after this has never really been explained. So the jet ski rental was only supposed to last 45 minutes, but over an hour goes by and Max and David Sr. are still not back yet. So Yvonne starts to worry and heads down to the beach, but to her surprise, there were people already trying to look for the 2 with binoculars. This is when things start to get strange. In a panic, Yvonne goes back to the resort and tells management that her son is missing, and that he was last seen with this strange older man that is also staying at this resort. So management then goes to the men's room room and starts knocking on the door in hopes of finding David Jr. inside, but nobody answers the door. So authorities were notified and a search and rescue boat was sent out to try and find them. In the distance, Yvonne could see the boat coming back, but mysteriously, only one person was on the boat, and it was David Sr. Max was nowhere to be found. What's odd is that this entire time that they were looking for the two, David Jr. was mysteriously missing as well, and he only showed back up when his dad was being rescued and being brought back to shore. When Yvonne asked him where he had been because they were looking for him, he said that he had passed out drunk in his room and didn't hear anyone knocking. When David Sr. was brought back to shore, he was mysteriously covered in scratches all over his neck and arms, and when asked about what happened, his answer was truly disturbing. David Sr. said that he and Max went out to a sandbar a few miles away and decided to get off their jet skis. When they tried to leave, their jet skis wouldn't turn back on, so Max tied them together so they wouldn't float away. But as he was doing this, he said that he heard a loud thump, and when he looked around, he saw Max floating away. He said that was the last he ever saw of Max, and that he didn't try to help him or anything. Because of the scratches all over him, the Aruban police brought him in for questioning, and his story started to not add up. David Sr. first told police that Max let go of the jet skis and started swimming to shore, but he then changed his story entirely. He was just very calmly floating away, like he didn't even try to swim. The man said he tried calling out to him, but Max wasn't responding, although he said his eyes were open. It was very obvious that he was lying and hiding something, so Yvonne asked authorities to check under his fingernails to see if they could find any DNA, or to possibly give him a lie detector test. But Aruban police told her no, that this isn't America, and that they don't do things like that. When asked about how he got those scratches, David Sr. said that he got them from trying to climb back on his jet ski. It's weird because he had done this before, like he wasn't new to riding jet skis, but his entire neck and both of his arms were literally covered in scratches. That doesn't just happen by simply trying to get back on a jet ski, I'm sorry. Although this man was clearly hiding something, the police let him go and pretty much just believed every word he said. Although a massive search was launched by boat and air, Max was never found. Authorities stated that Max was lost at sea, that this was all just a tragic accident, and they eventually stopped searching for him. There really wasn't much that Yvonne could do as authorities weren't helping her, so she and her daughter had to go back home without Max. One thing that really stood out to me though was that on the flight home, the two men were actually sitting behind Yvonne, and David Sr. said something to her that is honestly really sinister. He asked Yvonne if he could send her flowers on Max's missing anniversary. Who says something like that? After this, Yvonne never saw those two men again. After going home, Yvonne did everything she could to try and get media attention for Max's disappearance, but this was quickly overshadowed by the disappearance of Natalie Holloway, who also went missing in Aruba just a year after Max, and news of her disappearance was everywhere, like you couldn't turn on a TV without hearing about it. Not too long after this, a local police detective near Yvonne's home in Michigan decided to take on Max's case. It didn't take him long while researching Max's case to immediately figure out something horrible happened to him, and that it wasn't just an accident. He started reviewing the statements given by David Sr. in Aruba and noticed how his story didn't add up. So he decided to run a background check on him, and what he found is horrifying. He found that David Sr. was arrested in 1981 for sexually abusing another 14-year-old boy, the same age as Max. But this wasn't just any random 14-year-old boy. It was his own adoptive son, David Jr., who was the one traveling with him in Aruba. This was a major red flag to the detective, because if he was arrested for assaulting his own son, why were they now still in contact and traveling together? So then he started going through David Jr.'s statements given in Aruba, and he found that he lied about something major. He said that his dad had never been arrested, which obviously was not true because he had personally been a victim of his own dad and knew he was arrested for it. Then he started oversharing a bunch of really odd information, saying how he's 100% heterosexual and had never done anything intimate with a boy or man. This was all voluntarily said by him, which was weird. This detective got the FBI to briefly investigate this case, and they actually brought David Jr. in for questioning. He of course denied having anything bad to do with Max's disappearance, and he stood on the fact that it was just a tragic accident. So the FBI offered him to take a polygraph test, in which he agreed, and he was scheduled to take it the following day. But not so shockingly, he never showed up. I guess the FBI was eventually taken off this case because they were assigned to a bigger case, but they believed that these two men were working together to target other young boys. They believed that David Jr. was used to groom Max into creating a friendship bond, and then when David Sr. took Max out to the sandbar, he had his son meet him out there so that they could both assault Max and kill him. And that's why David Sr. was covered in scratches, because Max fought for his life. Despite how obvious it was that Max was met with foul play, his case would soon fall cold, and no movement would happen until April of 2016. One day, seemingly out of the blue, Yvonne gets a message from a woman asking to talk about Max. The woman doesn't want to be named publicly for fear of her safety, but she goes on to tell Yvonne that she dated David Jr. recently for a year. She said that one day, she, David Jr., and his dad were all sitting in the living room when his dad suddenly blurted out, quote, "Hey, has he ever mentioned anything about the 14-year-old who went missing in Aruba?" End quote. The woman says no because David Jr. had never mentioned anything about it before, and his dad said that his son was really close with the boy and it hurt him a lot when he went missing. Later that night, the woman asked David Jr. what happened that day in Aruba, which made him incredibly mad. He yelled at her to never mention him ever again. Apparently, this woman had a son from a previous relationship, and she said that after this interaction, she started paying attention to how David Sr. would act around her son. She said he got really close with her son and always wanted him to sit on his lap. She left after this and decided to Google missing 14-year-old boy in Aruba and found Max's story. She then reached out to Yvonne wanting to somehow help. This is when Yvonne found yet another girl this man had dated and had reached out to her as well. This woman said that on one occasion, David Jr. told her that the only good thing his father had ever done for him was get him out of trouble in Aruba. She said that David Jr. would sleep talk and say Max's name, and one night she confronted him about it, asking who Max was. He then snapped and held her at gunpoint, strangling and stabbing her, but somehow the woman was able to escape and survive this attack. David Jr. was arrested for this, but somehow he only ever got 2 years probation for literal attempted murder. It's now been 20 years, and Max has never been found. The two men have never been charged in connection to this case, although the way I see it is that there are two people in this entire world who know exactly what happened to him. Max's mom is here on TikTok trying to get some focus back on his case, so please go and follow her and show her your support. Nothing, and I mean nothing, is worse than having a child go missing and decades later still not having any answers. But it's now been 21 years, and what exactly happened to Max that day in Aruba remains a mystery.
Her body lay there in the woods, crumpled up with a broken neck. Then she started blinking. It was the 29th of April 2006 in Belleville in Illinois. The locals were absolutely worried sick. This 17-year-old girl from the area, Ashley Reeves, had vanished. Now, she was a lovely girl. She lived with her younger sister and her parents, and I believe she was job hunting at the time when she went missing. She'd actually intended to just go to an interview that day, play basketball, and come straight home. She took a change of clothes, obviously, because she wasn't going to play basketball in the same clothes that she went to her interview in. She said to her parents, "Don't worry, I'll be home by 10 p.m. But time ticks on, and she never showed up, and her parents were like, she can't be playing basketball this late. So her parents tried to retrace her steps. Now, what they did know from that day is that she had borrowed her boyfriend's car. Now, this was Jeremy Smith, but as far as the parents knew, he was a nice guy. I mean, he'd been super helpful giving her the car to take to the interview, and he'd not seen her since. Mum just had this gut feeling. She was like, I know something bad has happened. So she called the police. And the police did their usual, maybe she's out hanging out with friends, maybe she's run away, maybe she lost track of time. I hear this so much, guys. Maybe I'm just being unfair here, but I really do feel like a lot of the time police do just shrug these missing persons cases off. But time dragged on, and it was getting more and more obvious that something bad had happened. And after 8 hours of Ashley still being a no-show, police found something very worrying. It was the boyfriend's abandoned car. And inside of that car was the spare change of clothes, which proved Ashley had never even made it to basketball that night. So what stopped her? Now, it was actually kind of a blessing that Ashley was so young that her mobile phone was actually registered in her mum's name. That meant police could get permission from the mum and then obviously from the telephone company that they could get all of the phone records. And they found out she had multiple calls off a very surprising contact, her teacher, Samson Shelton. So officers contacted him, and honestly, he was incredibly sus from the get-go. He actually said he had nothing to do with her disappearance and just put the phone down. Like, surely if that was your student and they were missing, you would be concerned. And when Ashley's friends started getting wind that she was missing too, They actually came forward to police and they were like, no, he's definitely got something to do with this, because she was actually kind of seeing him like in a romantic way. I guess you would say that he was grooming her because A, she was so young, and B, he was also in obviously a position of power as a teacher. And infuriatingly, even when they brought him in for questioning, he still couldn't keep his story straight. Lies upon lies upon lies. Constant denial until hours and hours of questioning was finally kind of breaking him down. He eventually admitted to seeing her that day and being in that car with her. And he claimed that they argued, but get this, he was making out like he was the victim. It was like, she was obsessed with me, she wouldn't leave me alone, and we ended up having this argument. He said that she was provoking him and he got her in a headlock. He then said he heard a pop and was like, oh my God, what have I done? Horrifically, he admitted to then putting a belt around her neck. He said he pulled as hard as he could using his foot for leverage. The belt then snapped and he used his own bare hands to choke her again just to make sure she was dead. Now obviously the police are still interviewing him at this point, finding all this out, and by this time it was 30 hours since she vanished. Police knew time was running out and they could potentially be losing valuable evidence, so they were like, tell us where she is. He was like, fine, I'll lead you to the body. Little did he know they were going to find a lot more than they bargained for. He took them through Citizens Park to where Ashley lay, and the one officer was like, okay, she's clearly dead. Then her eyes started to move. By some miracle, this girl was alive. I mean, if you've seen the video, you know exactly what I mean. She looks like a body. They were filming this for a true crime show. You can actually watch it online. You can watch them find her. She was bitten half to death by bugs and she was contorted in a way. Honestly, it doesn't look possible for a human to be twisted in. But she was alive. She was raced to hospital. She was put in an induced coma and she ultimately had to learn to walk and talk again. But she managed to survive. I mean, one of the most badass women I've ever heard of. Hampson was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but infuriatingly was released after spending just 17 behind bars.
On the night of July 10th, 2001, emergency services in Sydney, Australia received a frantic phone call at 11:48 p.m. from 20-year-old Seth Gonzalez. He was in clear distress, calling to report that he had just walked in on the most gruesome crime scene inside of his own family house. And there he discovered the bodies of his father, his mother, and his little sister. This case, I feel like, changed Australia forever, so let's talk about it. The Gonzalez family story begins in the Philippines, where Theodore Teddy Gonzalez worked as a successful lawyer and businessman. He married a woman in 1977 called Mary, and together they built their dream life. In 1980, the couple gave birth to their first child, a son they called Seth, and 3 years later, his sister Claudine was born. The family owned multiple properties. They were more than financially stable, and more than anything, they were happy. However, their lives changed dramatically on July 16th of 1990, when an earthquake struck the Philippines. It destroyed not only their house but also their businesses and the newly built hotel that they had just purchased. Seth, the little boy, was only 10 years old at the time and he got trapped underneath the rubble. His father had to quite literally dig him out from underneath to rescue him. Obviously, it was a very traumatizing situation for the entire family and it prompted them to move to Australia for a fresh new start. The family settled in the quiet Sydney suburb of North Ryde and they pretty much had to rebuild their entire lives from the ground up. Teddy reestablished himself as an immigration lawyer, opening up a family law firm. Mary worked as a secretary at that firm while both of the children attended local schools. By the year 2000, the family felt comfortable enough to then build a new house, their dream home. From the outside looking in, the Gonzalez family appeared to be the picture of success. They were a well-respected family in their community. They attended church every single Sunday. Neighbors described them as hardworking and family-oriented, but it was no secret that Teddy and Mary were strict parents. They ran a tight ship when it came to their kids. So if you didn't know them, you would think that they were a seemingly perfect family, but of course we know that that is not always the case. Teddy and Mary Gonzalez held very high expectations for their children, particularly for their son Seth. They pretty much had his future planned out for him. They saw him either becoming a doctor or a lawyer, continuing on the family's professional legacy, and that pressure on Seth on the inside, it made him feel like failure was just not an option, and the things that his parents expected out of him really weighed heavy on him. Seth enrolled at the University of New South Wales to study law, working part-time at the family firm, and nobody besides him knew it, but he began to struggle academically and began failing behind on his classes. But was he going to tell his parents? No. In Steph's mind, that wasn't even an option. So instead, he just lied. He began forging papers from the school to lie to his parents, and he also lied to his friends, telling them that he was suffering from terminal cancer to not only explain his absences, but also because I think he liked receiving sympathy from his friends. Steph's sister, on the other hand, she was also a student in college, and she was doing so well. She was a great student, so naturally for Steph, it began to feel like there was this big strain in their family dynamic, and it almost felt like a competition between the two kids. As more and more time passed, things for Steph only got worse. He was in too deep with his lies. It was like all he could think about. But still, coming clean and facing everything that he was holding inside and telling the truth about all of his lies was not an option. He was so petrified of disappointing his parents to the point that he just felt stuck. And Steph then made the decision that the only way to crawl out of this hole that he dug himself in would be to get rid of his entire family. It made sense in his head. If he was able to get rid of his sister and his parents, then he would not only be able to just bury away his web of lies, but he would also gain a lot of money, because if his entire family disappeared, Steph would be the sole beneficiary of his parents' estate, meaning that he would get millions, and that was music to his ears. In the weeks and months leading up to July 10th, Steph Gonzalez had been carefully putting a plan together to eliminate his entire family. Evidence would later reveal that he had researched a lot of different ways to do it extensively on his computer. He once even ordered toxic plant seeds and attempted to secretly feed those to his mother, but that didn't work out. I mean, he did do it, and she did get really sick. She actually had to be hospitalized, but Mary was just under the impression that she probably just got food poisoning, never expecting that someone would have done something on purpose to make her ill, let alone her own son. So that didn't work out, but Steph came up with a different plan. On July 10th of 2001, he left the family law firm where he worked at part-time at approximately 4 p.m. and he drove home. Steph knew that his sister Claudine was going to be home alone, so he planned to make her his first victim. Before walking inside, he grabbed a baseball bat from his car and entered into his sister's room around 4:30 p.m. Using not only the baseball bat, but also kitchen and his bare hands, Steph killed his 18-year-old sister. Her autopsy would later show at least 6 separate injuries from the baseball bat to her head, as well as 5 injuries to her neck and 2 to her stomach from the kitchen. Afterwards, Steph waited in the house for his mother to arrive home from work. Mary got home around 5:30 p.m. When she walked into the house, obviously completely unaware that anything was wrong, Steph ambushed her in the living and dining room area, still holding on to one of the kitchen knives. Mary suffered injuries to her face, neck, chest, and abdomen, and within minutes, she was gone. Steph then waited again for his father to get home, and he did the exact same thing to him. One of his injuries was so deep that it went through his spinal cord. All of this took place in the span of approximately 3 hours, which is so awful to think about. The fact that he was like lurking in the shadows, waiting for each family member to get home. Steph had time to think about what he was doing, and he still decided to do it. Afterwards, Steph moved on to the next phase of his plan, which was staging the scene. He got rid of all of the weapons as well as his clothing and his shoes. He showered, and then before leaving the house, he wrote a terrible, awful, hateful message on the wall. He then drove to his friend's house. He was acting completely normal, and they just hung out. They went to dinner together, then went to an arcade. His friend later said that Steph showed zero signs of anything being wrong. Steph dropped off his friend at his house, drove home, called emergency services, pretending that he had been out of the house for a long time and that he had just walked in on this horrible crime scene. He then ran over to his neighbor's house, hysterical, really putting on a show. When authorities arrived at the scene, what they walked into was awful. No human being can ever be prepared to see such terrible things. And at first glance, reading the terrible message on the wall, it was easy to believe Steph's story, thinking that somebody broke into the house and did this. But for experienced homicide detectives, little things started to not really add up. Did not make a whole lot of sense. One of those things being that whatever happened inside of the house happened over the course of 3 hours, right? They were able to tell from the bodies that time had passed between each victim. There was no sign of forced entry and no sign that it could have been a robbery gone wrong. Steph's behavior was also starting to look a little bit sus. Even the neighbors noticed that even though Steph seemed to be hysterical, there were no tears coming out of his eyes, and everything that he was saying and doing felt a little bit too much like a performance rather than being genuine feelings of distress. When Steph spoke out publicly for the first time, he said, quote, "3 corners of my world are now gone. The best way I could possibly describe my father is that he was my hero and my role model. My mother was the heart of the family. She was the heart of her friends and anyone who knew her. My sister was the life of the family. She was an expert in smiling and made us all believe that life should be taken lightly," end quote. Steph also begged for whoever was responsible for committing the crime to please come forward, do the right thing, and turn themselves in. He was really trying his best to fake his grief, but even at the funeral, people noticed that his behavior was just off. Everything about the way that he was acting felt so off and fake, like he was pretending to be sad. And what did Seth then do? Within days of his entire family passing away, Seth asked the family accountant about how much money he would be getting from the inheritance, which was 1.5 million in Australia assets plus additional funds from the Philippines. He also quickly started to plan to make a deposit for a brand new luxury car, and he moved into a brand new fancy apartment in an amazing area. Investigators found out all of that on top of the things that already did not make sense about the crime scene, and on top of that, they found that Seth's alibi was incredibly inconsistent. All of that combined put Seth at the top of their suspect list. At first, authorities did not make it known to the public that they were looking into Seth, but they did state that they were not ruling anyone out. But when they did eventually announce that Seth was being looked at as a suspect, Seth then faked an abduction. In June of 2002, authorities received an anonymous call to report a struggle, and when officers got to the scene, Seth was lying on the side of the road, claiming that somebody had ambushed him, dragged him into a car, and put a plastic bag over his head. Literally made the entire thing up, and less than 2 weeks after that, almost 1 year after the murders, Seth Gonzalez was arrested and charged for the murders of his sister, his mother, and his father. There was an overwhelming amount of evidence against him. He was being held in custody awaiting trial, and the entire time he was maintaining his innocence, making up different lies left and right. His trial began in May of 2004, and there it was revealed that Claudine, his sister, had found out that Seth was failing university. She had told their parents, and they told Seth that if his grades did not improve, they would take away his car. In that courtroom, it was more than clear that Seth was a pathological liar, not only to his parents and his sister, but to every single other person in his life. And not only when it came to school, he lied about every aspect of his life. He made up lies things that were just weird to lie about, like things that didn't even really benefit him. He just lied for the sake of lying. The prosecution argued the murders were premeditated, carefully planned, and executed with cold calculation. And the defense said that, yeah, Seth had issues, but that he did not kill his entire family. But the evidence against him was literally so much, not only physical, but also digital and circumstantial evidence. On May 20th of 2004, after reviewing all of the evidence, hearing testimonies, the jury reached their verdict. They found Seth Gonzalez guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Since then, he has tried to make a number of appeals, but they have all been denied, and he remains in custody. Yeah, for claiming to be such a smart guy, there's not much going on up there. Anyway, that is all I have for today's story. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
This grandmother killed her 2 husbands 30 years apart and almost got away with it. Colleen Harris was born on March 28, 1942 in San Francisco, California. Not much is known about her early years. Colleen married her first husband, Larry, when she was very young, and they married very quickly after they met. This is kind of a pattern when it comes to Colleen. The two started a family together, but Larry was pretty much cheating on Colleen right away. I actually saw it reported that Larry cheated on Colleen with 15 separate women. When Colleen discovered her husband's affairs, she took their kids and left him. Larry tried to come win Colleen back, but she threatened him with a weapon to get out of her house, and the two quickly divorced after that. Larry is Colleen's only surviving husband, and I truly do believe that it was her first husband's betrayal and all of his affairs that made Colleen so vengeful. Colleen then met Jim Baden. The two fell for each other very hard and very fast, and it wasn't long until they were married. Jim actually seemed like a really good catch. He didn't have any children of his own, but he truly loved Colleen's kids. He also owned his own very successful business that Colleen would help him out with. But after being together for over 10 years, Jim and Colleen were fighting all of the time. It wasn't a happy marriage anymore, so in 1985, Jim asked Colleen for a divorce. And then on the night of July 31st, 1985, 43-year-old Colleen called the police and said, "I shot my husband, I think. I don't know. I don't remember. I don't know if I even shot him." And when the police got there, 47-year-old Jim was dead on the bedroom floor right next to their bed. And their bed was absolutely covered in blood, so it looked like Jim had been shot while he was laying on his bed, and then he was pushed onto the ground next to the bed, which is actually very important to remember later on. Colleen claimed that that night she found out that her husband was SAing her underage daughter that she had from her first marriage, or that her husband was threatening to SA her daughter. And according to Colleen, she confronted her husband, and then he threatened to shoot her And after that, the rest was a blur. Colleen said that she kind of blacked out, and when she regained consciousness, her husband Jim was dead. So she assumed that she shot him in self-defense because right before she blacked out, she remembered feeling like she was going to die. And in this situation, the first thing you'd probably do is call the police. You'd probably be very confused and very scared. But the first thing that Colleen actually did was call her lawyer. They talked on the phone for over an hour, and then Colleen called the police. Colleen was arrested for the first-degree murder of her husband Jim, and on trial, she stuck to the same story, that he was threatening her and her underage daughter, so whatever happened was in self-defense, but that she couldn't remember anything because she blacked out. And blacking out is actually something that could have happened. Your brain in a very traumatic situation will kind of black out to protect itself. And the jury actually did believe Colleen, and she was found not guilty of murder. But even then, there were a lot of people that thought that Colleen got away with murder, that she likely killed her husband because he was going to divorce her, he was going to leave her, and with him gone, she would inherit his successful business. He also owned a lot of properties that were worth a lot of money, and he just had a lot of money in general. And after Colleen was found not guilty of her husband's murder, she went right back to living life as normal, except this time she was living off of Jim's money and also was running his business. And about 2 years after the trial ended, Colleen started dating Bob Harris. They actually met when they were teenagers, and they went on a date, but nothing really happened after that. Colleen went on to have a few husbands. Bob also got married. He had 3 children and divorced. And it was at this point that Colleen and Bob reconnected 30 years after their first date as teenagers. They just bumped into each other. And within weeks of running into each other, they fell really hard for each other really, really fast, and they started dating. Bob's 3 children seemed to like Colleen at first, but his mom did not like Colleen. This is like motherly instincts because she felt like her son's new girlfriend was hiding something. Colleen had told Bob's family that her second husband died tragically from heart problems, but his mother actually did some research and found out that her son's new girlfriend was actually the one that shot and killed her husband and actually went on trial for his murder. Bob's family assumed that he didn't know anything about this, so they told him about what they found, but Bob assured his family that he knew everything, that Colleen told him that her second husband was extremely abusive and she had to kill him in self-defense. And it actually wasn't long after this that Bob and Colleen were married. And they would be together for many, many, many years. And Bob's family tried to be happy for him, but they were very skeptical and suspicious of Colleen the entire time. In 1997, Bob retired, and about 7 years later, in 2005, Colleen and Bob were both in their 60s. And Colleen also wanted to retire, but Bob told her that he didn't think that they could survive just off Social Security, and at least one of them had to keep working. And that's when Colleen, who really wanted to retire, came up with an idea. If Colleen and Bob were to get a divorce, then Colleen would go back to being a widow, technically, because her second husband died because she shot him. But if Colleen was technically a widow at her age, she would be eligible for a bunch of benefits and money. But Bob was pretty disgusted that his wife of now 15 years was saying that she wanted to get a divorce just so she could get money, pretty much get money because she killed her husband, self-defense or not. Reluctantly, Bob still went along with this plan. They got a divorce, she got the money, and then they remarried. But even after they remarried, Bob's perception of Colleen had changed after this. He never saw her the same after she took the money from killing her husband, and he became very unhappy in the marriage. After retiring, Bob started doing a lot of conservation work in Mongolia, and by 2012, Bob was going to Mongolia to do this work all the time, more and more, because he wanted to get away from his wife. Bob is in his 70s, and it was while in Mongolia that Bob started having an affair with a 34-year-old local woman, a woman that was less than half of his age. And when Colleen discovered the affair, she was absolutely devastated. She actually discovered that her husband was cheating while he was away in Mongolia, so she had to wait for him to return to confront him. And when she did, it was actually Bob that suggested that he move out and they get a divorce. And Colleen was oddly calm about it. Bob moved out, but about a month later, Colleen had to get a pretty serious surgery, so Bob offered to move back in and help her as she recovered from the surgery. I imagine that he felt pretty guilty, and for a while after that, they were kind of living like husband and wife again, or at least I imagine that's what Colleen thought about it. She truly thought that they would work this out and get back together. But Bob was still planning to move back out and go forward with the divorce once Colleen recovered. And then one evening on January 5th, 2013, Bob and Colleen were hanging out at home when Bob got a call, and it was actually his mistress calling him. Colleen was absolutely devastated. She thought that her and Bob were going to get back together. She didn't even know that Bob was still in contact with this woman. And then the very next day, Colleen's lawyer, the exact same lawyer that she called after shooting her husband Jim, and also the same lawyer that represented her at her murder trial, called 911, and Colleen's lawyer told the police on the line that there was a homicide at the home of Colleen and Bob.
Been a homicide.
Okay, what happened?
Yeah, I can't tell you. I'm an attorney.
When police got to the home, Colleen was acting very confused, like she had no idea what was going on. Her husband, 72-year-old Bob Harris, was lying dead on their bed, blood everywhere. It was the exact same story from 30 years earlier. Colleen's husband is found dead, shot in bed, and Colleen had no memories on how it happened. I'm sure Colleen was thinking that the defense worked once before, why not try it again? But unlike the first time this happened, there was actually evidence that Colleen was not in a mental fog after her husband Bob was shot. Actually, within 1 hour of Bob being shot dead, Colleen drove over 200 miles to a storage unit where she hid the weapon she used to shoot Bob. She also hid a very valuable coin collection that Bob owned. I don't think that she figured that the police would be able to find out that she made this road trip, but they were easily able to track her GPS. Not only did she try to hide the murder weapon in the storage unit, but Colleen also tried to hide something very valuable that Bob owned, this like really expensive coin collection. I'm assuming that she thought she would go on trial, be found not guilty again, and then she could sell these coins that Bob owned and then take that money to start over once again. And another thing that makes Colleen's "I blacked out and I don't remember anything" defense not line up this time is when Colleen was driving home from the storage unit, her car actually broke down and she had to call AAA. And this call doesn't sound like someone that's unaware of her actions and in like a blacked out mental fog.
Thank you for calling AAA. May I have your name, please?
Colleen Harris.
Yes, Miss Harris. Are you in a safe location?
I just started swerving on the freeway, and then all of a sudden I kind of did a complete flip, and then the car won't start. I'm off of Highway 80. I can see a sign ahead of me that says UC Davis, Sacramento. I live in Pleasantville, so I have no way to get home unless I have the car.
Okay.
So, and I don't have anybody at home, so I'm just going to have to wait.
And then when Colleen finally did get home, she called her lawyer, not the police, once again. And she talked to her lawyer on the phone for over an hour and a half. And then the lawyer came over to the house, to the crime scene. And then it was her lawyer that finally called the police 10 hours after Bob was shot. Colleen was arrested for the first-degree murder of her third husband, Bob Harris, and was once again on trial for murder 30 years later. This time she tried to change her story, saying that she does remember shooting Bob, but it was an accident. She said that her husband Bob was sleeping with a weapon and she was concerned for his safety. So while he was sleeping, she tried to get it out from under him, and he woke up, saw his wife standing over him with a weapon. So he was scared. He tried to wrestle her for the weapon and it went off. And it was only after the weapon went off that Colleen blacked out, and it was then that she was in a mental fog and didn't remember anything. And once again, this story does not line up with the actual evidence. There's evidence that Bob was asleep when he was shot dead. And this is probably the exact same thing that happened to Jim, because if you remember, he was found dead on the floor, but all of the blood was in the bed. Colleen was likely upset that Bob was going to leave her, so she shot him dead while he was sleeping, just like she did with Jim. when he said that he was going to divorce her. And for the murder of Bob Harris, Colleen was found guilty of murder and she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 50 years. But at the age of 73 years old, Colleen will be behind bars for the rest of her life. And because of double jeopardy laws, Colleen will never be able to be charged again with Jim's murder. Even though I think it's really likely that she did kill both men. I mean, let me know your thoughts. I feel like a lot of you guys are going to agree with me, but let me know your thoughts in the comments. But while you're there, please remember to be respectful. This is Jim and Bob's story, and you don't know who could be in the comments. Someone that actually knew and loved Jim and Bob in real life could be in the comments. So please remember to always be respectful. And while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that we cover this case today. And I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.